So, in preparation for the next game I'm going to be doing an episode of How Not to Play about, I thought we'd play a little guessing game. I'm going to talk about a book that I felt was very closely related to the game, and you're going to guess what the game is going to be. So it's one that I bought the last time Anna was over here, and that we listened to together the last time I was over visiting Anna in America. It is The Truth, the 25th Discworld novel by Terry Pratchett, and the first in the Industrial Revolution theme. Moving Pictures has more in common with soul music and even Men-at-Arms than it does with The Truth and making money and going postal, so we both kind of count this as the first Industrial Revolution book. I don't know. Goes without saying, there are going to be spoilers for The Truth and probably the other 24 books leading up to it, so you've been warned, and if you want to keep the surprises for yourself, then don't watch. It's fine. We won't be upset. Just don't watch. Anyway, the plot involves this bloke, William DeWord, deciding, I want to make a printing press. Well, kind of. William's job is that he makes a gossipy newsletter for nobles in other countries and sends it off. He writes one letter, gets it copied by the engravers, and gets 15 copies, fills in the names, sends them all off. Then one day he gets knocked out by a bunch of dwarfs and their brand new invention, the printing press. So what happens next is that William ends up creating a newspaper, the Ankh-Morpork Times, kind of because the dwarfs are a little too enthusiastic. Through the newspaper he also ends up inventing print advertising, obituaries, corrections pages, readers' letters, and most importantly, investigative journalism, when he's drawn into a plot to get rid of the patrician. Not to kill the patrician, because Vetinari is much more dangerous dead than alive, to get rid of the patrician. It's a really well-plotted mystery, and it was really fun to read along and kind of get all the hints from all the different characters, some who'd been directly involved, some who hadn't, some who were figuring it out, and piece it all together yourself in your mind. We see very little of the actual crime. Compared to other Discworld books where there's been a mystery, we've usually seen from the point of view of the victim and them getting picked up by death. But in this one, since there is not any death, we sort of see the start of it, and then every other character involved in it talking about it and all the inconsistencies, but we don't actually see anything happening at the time of the actual crime itself. We don't even see the victim, Vetinari, apart from at the start and at the end, which is quite odd, because in the other Industrial Revolution books, he's a major character. Speaking of major characters, let's talk about William DeWord. Like Rincewind, he just sort of gets dragged into the plot because he's an anxious mess and not very assertive. At first, he seems to treat the Ankh-Morpork Times as something that's happening around him. He's kind of just there to watch it. But as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, he starts to help expand it and to organise it. Make sure they're getting more reporters, more features, more advertising, and also at the time reining a few of them in. Making sure that errors are corrected and rectified, making sure they don't print anything that's incorrect, making sure they're not outright lying to make up news. One of his traits, which is quite important, is that he doesn't lie. He even refrains from exposing his father as the perpetrator of this massive plot, partly because he doesn't know for definite that he is. Another part of it is familial loyalty, but it's not familial loyalty to his dear old dad, oh no. See, William had a falling out with his father before the book started, and Vetinari rubs that in his face in a really dick move near the beginning, but he doesn't want his mother or brother, especially not his brother, who is implied to have died during the events of Jingo, but he doesn't want their names dragged through the mud. So, he gets this great scene at the end where he manages to keep his family's legacy intact, take care of his father as a threat, exercise himself from his father's shadow, which is a minor thematic element throughout this book, and gain the moral high ground. I have no idea how many fingers I was holding up. I think I overcounted. Speaking of William and his morality, we should probably talk about Sakarilla Cripslock. She's the granddaughter of the guy William used to get to engrave his letters. So obviously, when he gets undercut by the dwarfs for being cheaper and being able to produce more stuff, Sakarissa and her grandfather kind of don't have any money. So Sakarissa runs in near the beginning to beat up William and berate him, and at first he gives her a job mostly so she'll stop hitting him. Then she starts influencing him in much more explicit ways as the book goes on. For instance, when William wants to give up on the paper and the printing press, it's Saccharissa who reminds him that it's become a lot bigger than he has now, and that if he leaves, it's going to fall apart, and a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. And a lot more people are going to lose something that they find interesting, and there could be a lot of good he could do with this. That's one of the other themes of the book, is that the printing press and the paper become much bigger, and despite not being sentient entities, like in moving pictures or soul music, it is something that is growing larger and influencing people. Aside from that, Saccharissa herself gets some nice development as the book goes on. She goes from being very old-fashioned and not sure whether this paper is a good idea, is it something young ladies do, I don't know, to showing way more initiative and way more eagerness. Her and William have very different skills and specialisations, but they complement each other really well, and they both help to build up the paper. William focuses on the big stuff, the truth, the things people need to know but maybe don't really want to. Whereas Saccharissa focuses on the little stuff, the stuff that's not that important, but, you know, it'd be nice to read your friend's name in the paper, or find out what a club you're into might be doing next week. The dwarfs who invented the printing press we mostly see through Goodmountain and Bodden, who, although creating the printing press, don't really have a huge investment in it, at least not at the start. In fact, until the Ankh-Morpork time starts really taking off, the dwarfs are still just making copy and posters and flyers for a bit of extra money. And they supply ideas for the paper sort of nonchalantly and offhand. It feeds into that theme I was talking about, that the newspaper almost has a life of its own. No one really wants to take credit for it. Not William, who's organising it, not the dwarfs, who are providing the means for it. The additions to the paper come as secondary ideas from other people who aren't really that aware of it. Part of this is because Goodmountain and Bodden, although they're proud of their work, don't really care that much about the printing press. They just sort of see it as a way to get money. Goodmountain and Bodden especially, they want to get married, and part of dwarf marriage rituals is you pay the parents of the person you want to marry, kind of like a dowry, kind of just like, this is all the expenses for raising a child. However, they do stick around when the paper begins to build up traction, and through explaining that dwarven marriage custom, they're the guys who give William a chance of removing his father from his life. The other major player at the newspapers is Otto Shriek, who is a darling. Otto is a vampire photographer who occasionally explodes when exposed to flash photography. Shit. It's unfortunate, and several times William has to pick him up and put him back together again. Otto is, like I said, absolutely lovely. He's one of the black ribbon vampires, who are vampires who've given up blood and picked something new to obsess over. And his is photography, iconography even, whatever it is. Otto is even trying to improve how iconography works on the disc. He's working on different kinds of flash, which become important later, how to get colour pictures from the newspaper. In many ways, Otto's hobsession, plays into the themes of the book. Specifically, the Industrial Revolution books in general, as he's improving and advancing already present technology on the disc to Victorian levels and even beyond that. I really like that the iconographs that start the series is just a tiny little thing one guy had from a far-off land that were completely strange to everyone in Ankh-Morpork, have developed into commonplace items, which is emphasised when we see an improved personal disorganiser, which Sam Vimes has had, and uses the same technology, it uses an imp in a box. And we see that being used by the new firm. The new firm are the more persistent antagonists in the book. Mr. Pin and Mr. Tulip get hired to get rid of the patrician, and while first appearing as competent and ruthless killers, it turns out as the book develops they're really out of their depth, which, again, theme of the Discworld. The Ankh-Morpork Watch is incredibly well organised and won't give up. They have the equivalent of CSI, they have a werewolf. As the book goes on, these two criminals realise they're completely bone. They fit into a nice niche, as they think they're modern criminals when compared to, like, the thieves' guilds and stuff. They think they're more ruthless, they think they're more dangerous, and in many ways they are, but they throw their weight around too much, almost get themselves killed in the undead bar. Even with a gun and a disorganizer, they end up outclassed just by thinking the way to win this is to be violent. I definitely prefer Mr. Tulip to Mr. Pin out of the two. Mr. Tulip is quirkier. He has a speech impediment, can't swear, he just says, "ing." Is that an ing harpsichord? He wants to have a drug addiction as well, but he just buys random stuff like deworming powder for dogs, or chalk. And he's an incredible fan of fine arts. He has so many comments on the beauty of different paintings and, like, instruments, and he gets aggressive when people threaten to destroy, whether they knew that or not. Compared to Mr. Pin, he seems to be more aggressive, while his partner is more calm, more collected. And later in the book, Mr. Pin seems to have a change of heart, whereas Mr. Tulip is still relishing all the murderous things they've done. But ultimately, it's subverted. Mr. Pin only began regretting his actions because one of Otto's flashes makes him see all of his past deeds come back to haunt him. And when the two agree to buy death, Mr. Pin shows no remorse, only fear of retribution. However, Mr. Tulip begins to consider and examine his actions, and sees that they were wrong, and he doesn't ask for forgiveness, he asks for time to comprehend them, so that he feels he's worthy of asking for forgiveness, so he knows what's wrong with them. He wants to, at the very least, comprehend if he deserves forgiveness, which I thought was really clever. Side note here, in the play version of The Truth, Mr. Pin is followed by ghostly figures from the moment Otto's dark light flash goes off. For the rest of the play, he's followed by these creepy guys that no one else can see, and I think that's very interesting. Anyway, another central character in this book is Gaspode the Wonder Dog, who is rapidly becoming one of my favourite characters in the whole series. He ends up persuading the rest of his gang to start selling papers, and also keeps the chief witness of the crime, Vetinari's terrier. No, Vetinari's dog. Vetinari's terrier is Vimes. Anyway, he's keeping him under protection. I think the thing I love about Gaspode is that every time people see a dog talking, they just ignore Gaspode and think that it's themselves talking. He even has to hide himself around William so that William thinks it's a person talking to him and not a dog. One of the things I really liked about this book is how we see Vimes from a different point of view. In every other book, we know that Sam Vimes is a protagonist. We know he's a good guy. He stands against injustice and corruption. He also wants to keep everyone safe. He's genuinely worried about William's newspaper making everything worse, causing civil unrest, even getting William himself hurt. But he doesn't like that William's interfering. He doesn't like that William has information he refuses to share, and he makes this displeasure very, very clear. I kind of want to know how people would feel reading this book first, because Vimes feels like a kind of overly aggressive busybody sergeant in this one, instead of the guy we know he is. But it's not out of character for him in this book, it's just told from a different perspective. Vimes is presented almost as an antagonist, albeit one who has the city and even William's best interests at heart. This book really develops the disc. Anna said it was kind of important I read or listen to this one before I started on Going Postal and the other Industrial Revolution books, for good reason, which is what I've been eager to do. I really like the idea of the Moist One Lit book series. And those books include the Ankh-Morpork Times to a greater degree. It's also the first of the Discworld books to include a modern concept to a mostly medieval world. Okay, technically the Fifth Elephant introduces the Clacks first, but still. It also introduces a modern technology that's not a conduit for an evil creature. As a result, Vetinari actually believes the Times might end up ripping a hole in the fabric of space-time, because he knows about the soul music, he knows about the moving pictures, to a lesser degree he knows about the gone. But the effects on people, while vast, are refreshingly just the result of people being people. It's human curiosity, and it could be argued that that's what prompts him to embrace the railway in the penultimate book of the series, and what gets him to plan on modernising Ankh-Morpork in, like, earnest and out of the goodness of his heart. I still maintain my veterinary's evil, but whatever. Although the press isn't sentient, William does realise it has a powerful hold on him and the lives of everyone who reads and writes for it. The Clax Towers introduced in the previous book are also expanded on a little. We see that they cost a lot to use, but also that William starts using them to confirm findings, to double check stories against a rival newspaper that's just printing absolute drivel. Whereas in the Fifth Elephant they were a lifeline back home, in the Truth we see just how far it's possible to communicate with the world. Something I really like about the Discworld, because it's something I hate a lot about fantasy. Take Dragon Age, take Lord of the Rings. I love Dragon Age, but after 1,000 years, the setting hasn't changed at all. After 13 years, the Discworld's gone from medieval to pseudo-Victorian. So, that was The Truth by Terry Pratchett. Definitely one of my favourite Discworld books, and not just because I was listening to it with the love of my life while we took a bus around a beautiful scenic island. There's so much more I want to say about this book, but I'm kind of strapped for time. This video is already twice the length it was supposed to be, so I might do a previous video on it, or maybe I'll get Anna to do it because she's the better Discworld nerd. Anyway, like I said, we're going to play a guessing game, so this is a book about newspapers and the truth. Can you guess what game I'm going to be playing next? Leave your answers in the comments and make sure to stay subscribed and click the little bell for notifications thing, and you'll find out as soon as that video comes out. Are you still here? Video's over. You can click one of these things on the side, I guess, but I'm not going to entertain you anymore. Just click something and go.